Hello, hello, and welcome to a Halo thing. Yeah, I said I was going to do one eventually, and no, I didn't forget about you guys. But I'll talk about the future of this channel at the end. When this video started and you heard that chorus, one of two things happened. You either nodded and rolled your eyes because, yeah, it's the Halo thing, or you perked your ears because even though you've heard it a million times before, it still sounds special to you. To the latter group, hey, welcome, and take a seat. I know you're here for a good old-fashioned nostalgia wink, and I am one of you. Thanks for coming. And to the former, I have an admission to make. I am not impartial, and I have an agenda. I bias. I believe Halo is a uniquely important work in the history of video games as an artistic medium. Objective the first. I want to convince you that Halo, the crusty original, is art. Like capital A-R-T in a serif font to recall a classical Greco-Roman aesthetic. Do note that this is different from it being the best game ever made. Objective the second. I want to convince you that Halo, the crusty original, is worth playing as a piece of gaming history, because video games, being an intrinsically interactive medium, must be played to be truly appreciated. I want to nod to the importance of game preservation, but in the case of Halo, we're pretty fortunate. Name another franchise with better official legacy support. There are some lingering issues with the Master Chief Collection, but by and large, it is a staggering win for game preservation by being an easy and legal way for new players to experience a classic game on modern, easily accessible hardware, and I'm very thankful for it. That only applies to the single player. I honestly don't care all that much about the multiplayer, so don't at me if there are problems there because I don't know anything about it. For single player, I'm honestly pretty happy with the Master Chief Collection as a package nowadays. Anyway, I'm already like 5 tangents deep, so I'm not going to go into those lingering issues because they don't really matter, and I will instead take this opportunity to thank my supporters over on Patreon, currently on screen. These folks go above and beyond to support the channels, and I'm very grateful to them. Links in the Zooble if you are so inclined. Financial support is never required, but always appreciated. Thank you. A note on Halo Campaign Evolved. I'm making this pretty shortly after the reveal of the Halo CE remaster thing. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but just let me keep huffing copium that we might be seeing a lot of unfinished placeholder stuff for a little longer, okay? Okay, I will comment on the name. It's absolutely terrible and will do unspeakable damage to the fan community around the original game. Use different initials, please. Halo Combat Reimagined. There you go. The connection is obvious to series veterans without obliterating the existing fan community around the old games. The new Halo can be good, hypothetically, but that shouldn't come completely at the expense of the old games that are still good games. Anyway, I'm not going to bring it up much because it's probably a year off yet, and who knows how much could change. Let me keep huffing the copium for a moment longer. I know it's gonna suck though. Halo fans, we're the new Sonic fans, man. This probably isn't the first or the last video essay on Halo you're gonna listen to today. I know you because I am you. So I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of events. Around the turn of the century, there were software development studios that exclusively made Mac software. Not specifically games, just software in general. They were Mac people, they used Macs, they made software for Macs. That was their market. Bungie was one of these developers, and they had seen pretty strong success throughout the 90s with several of their games, but most notably the Marathon trilogy of first-person shooters. After making 3 of those, Bungie was kinda tired of making first-person shooters, so they set out to make a real-time strategy game, somewhat similar to their earlier Myth games, but with a sci-fi theme. This had the internal codename Monkey Nuts. This was changed to Blam! With an exclamation point, when Jason Jones was too ashamed to say Monkey Nuts in front of his mom. That's adorable. Halo was made by real people, you guys, it's great. Anyway, the real-time strategy game became a third-person shooter, became a first-person shooter, became a third-person shooter again, at which point it was introduced by Steve Jobs at Macworld as an OpenGL tech demo for its public reveal.
This game is going to ship early next year from Bungie, and this is the first time anybody has ever seen it. It's the first time they've debuted it. And so I'm very happy to welcome on the stage Jason Jones, who is the co-founder of Bungie and the Halo project lead. Halo is the name of this game, and we're going to see, for the first time, Halo.
Everything you're about to see is being rendered in real time on a Macintosh using OpenGL.
Microsoft saw this, and with the Xbox program still well before a public reveal, but needing to start filling out a roster of launch titles, swooped in and bought Bungie from right under Apple's nose. This is such a wild business move, and I love it, but one detail that I rarely see brought up is how when Halo was shown at Macworld, it was framed as a demonstration of OpenGL support, but the Xbox is called the Xbox in reference to its support for DirectX, Microsoft's graphics API. It was called the DirectX box during development. If that sounded like a nonsense sentence to you, don't worry about it. But also, I'm gonna keep going just a moment longer for the super nerds in the back because I don't see this get brought up very often. Halo was shown off as a tech demo for OpenGL, which did not support programmable shaders in 1999. That support didn't arrive until after Halo's release with OpenGL in version 1.4 in 2002, and even then only by way of an extension. Microsoft sneaks in, and now they have to turn the game into a first-party showcase of DirectX, which was heavily pushing its shader model to developers. This is why everything in early Xbox games has crazy bump mapping on basically every surface, by the way. It was a new and shiny toy. OpenGL didn't get official GLSL support until version 2, a couple months before Halo 2 released, which came out 1 week before Half-Life 2. Gamers, we were eating so good! 6th and 7th gen, my beloved! Anyway, after the Macworld demo, Bungie turned Halo into a first-person shooter again, and then had the daunting task of translating a game meant for a device with over 100 buttons on one hand and an extremely precise pointer on the other to the Duke. I think to appreciate the genius of Halo's design, you really have to understand the context of what gaming looked like at the time, though especially the first-person shooter landscape. By the time of Halo's release, handling 3D graphics in real time was no longer the nigh insurmountable challenge it once was, but some of the most dominant first-person shooters of the day were Quake 3 Arena, Unreal Tournament, and Half-Life, the first one. All great games in their own right, but they were a clear evolution in thought, drawing much of their mechanical inspiration from what we now call boomer shooters, games like Doom, Quake, and even Bungie's own Marathon. Again, these are great games, but they're built for PC. The player is super fast, aim needed to be fast but precise, and the player is bristling with an entire number row of weapons. And that presented developers with several challenges when attempting to translate the genre over to console. A very fast player character can be difficult to control, and necessitates a high turning speed that can easily be disorienting. Both are bigger issues for new players, and remember, the genre wasn't as prolific as it is today, especially on console, so it's to be expected that a lot of players new to the genre might be playing Halo. And Halo had a rather low FOV, which did not help with disorientation, as I discovered when I once managed to rope my mother into playing co-op with me. As for having 10 weapons, each with its own discrete button on the keyboard, the number row alone would account for most of the buttons on a controller, so that obviously wasn't going to work. But this design of the player having access to a plethora of weapons at any given time was, at this point, baked into the very DNA of the genre. Progression through linear levels was rewarded with new enemies and new guns with which to fight them, but the traditional number bar wasn't practical on a controller, and I can't remember a radial menu off the top of my head that predates Ratchet & Clank in 2002. There are probably a few, go ahead and name them in the comments, but the point is that just slap a radial menu in there wasn't a go-to solution. And radial menus have some issues themselves, but that's not this essay. Console first-person shooters around this time often used left and right on the D-pad to cycle through a linear list of weapons. This, obviously, is extremely clunky, and not particularly well suited to an action game of split-second reactions. And as for how to even handle the joysticks, oh, it was not figured out yet. I cannot tell you the number of first and third person games I played where up and down moved you forward and back, but left and right turned you, while the other stick up and down looked up and down, but left and right would make you strafe? Nonsense. Halo often gets credit for the modern control scheme of movement on left stick looking on right stick, and I think it rightfully gets to claim credit for popularizing it. But Alien Resurrection on the PS1 actually did it first, and thanks to Wikipedia, Stephen Garrett will never be able to live down how he didn't like it. Though, in his defense, that game genuinely feels pretty terrible. Incredible audio direction for the PS1 though. And aiming in console FPS games around this time was just weird. Games were still doing that GoldenEye thing, I'm sorry to report. Like, what problem does this weird aiming mode even solve? This game, by the way, is Time Splitters, and it uses controls that are physically laid out like Halo a year before Halo released. Time Splitters can trace a direct lineage from GoldenEye and can claim Perfect Dark as a sibling. Just putting that out there for any intrepid game history explorers that want a clean little lineage to enjoy. So Bungie had their work cut out for them. They needed to port their game to a hardware platform that was still in development with an unfamiliar software stack and a completely different input device, and they only had 9 months to do it before they were set to be a launch title. Rather than making a game that played it safe, that followed the established norms and didn't take chances, they threw it all out and went all in on creating a sandbox that would forever change the direction of gaming. So let's finally talk about the gameplay, shall we? We are the Master Chief, possibly the last of a generation of super soldiers known as Spartan 2s, and possibly humanity's only chance to survive against the alien forces of the Covenant. We are woken up from cryo on board the UNSC Pillar of Autumn, which has been pursued through slipspace by several Covenant vessels despite making a blind jump, and finds itself approaching an unknown ringworld. As was becoming popular at the time, Halo opens with a tutorial section, teaching players how to move and look around. This wasn't completely unwarranted. Remember that most players were probably seeing what is now the standard control scheme for the very first time. The first thing that might hit you if you were playing this in 2001 on a tiny CRT that you were definitely not sitting too close to is just how slow the Master Chief is. Or maybe you don't because you're a tween and this is your first FPS ever, so you have no frame of reference, but an older gamer might note that Chief has the aerodynamics of a brick.
For a brick, he flew pretty good.
The movement speed of Halo is an obvious contrast to the dominant PC shooters of the time, and I believe can be traced mostly to a desire to make the game more approachable to new players. Slower movement speed makes it harder to lose track of where you are. Now, I want to be very clear that the controls do not feel sluggish. They are precise and responsive. In fact, I'll argue all day every day that Halo games had the best feeling console FPS controls until COD4 in 2008 finally got within punching distance. If you don't remember what this was like, try playing Borderlands 1 with a controller. Your aim might as well be a digital input. It feels terrible. That's just how everything but Halo and eventually Call of Duty felt for a really long time. But even playing on PC, where you have the full advantages of a mouse, you're still piloting the Master Chief kinda like a tank. He doesn't really get much faster than a steady jog, and there's enough momentum to your movement that you can't just bail out of every situation if you get in too deep. We're gonna come back to that idea, so you just tuck that somewhere for later. But your similarities to a heavily armed and armored military vehicle extends beyond your slow movement and occasionally weird feeling hitbox. Although you don't have much opportunity to take damage for a while yet, Bungie uses the tutorial to show the player exactly how their shields work. Health in first-person shooters up to this point was a set resource doled out by the developer throughout levels in the form of health packs or whatever themed pickup you want. Level designers would strategically place these health packs around the level to, effectively, set how much damage the player was allowed to receive up to that point in a level. The health available to the player within the level was then one of the things used to control difficulty. Halo 1 still has health packs, but they're greatly diminished in importance because of the addition of shields. The Chief has a shield that absorbs some damage until it breaks, at which point you begin to lose health. This is the birthplace of regenerating health. Halo in 2001. Now it's practically the expectation. The really neat thing with the implementation in Halo 1 is how the shield plus health system works in tandem with the player's comparatively low movement speed. It further helps to shift the skill being tested away from mere reaction time and into planning and tactics. Once you become more accustomed to just how much damage your shields can take, health becomes a resource for the player to manage. Sometimes, it's worth losing a block or two of health if it means getting a critical shot off. I'll elaborate on that later when we talk about enemies, because once we've proven that we're able to walk around well enough by navigating our way to the bridge, it's time to talk about guns, glorious guns. In first-person shooters, the player's primary interaction with the world is through the weapon in their hands, and Halo is no different. Rather than overwhelming the player with a smorgasbord of firearms, Halo instead chooses to have only 8, allowing each to carve out a little space in the sandbox. Again, easing the player in, only 4 guns are available in this first level, cleanly split down the middle between human and Covenant weapons. We get our mission from Captain Keyes. The Pillar of Autumn is not winning this fight. We have to escape the Pillar of Autumn with Cortana, the ship's AI, to protect the valuable information she holds, like the location of Earth. And then we're casually handed what is probably the most iconic handgun in gaming. Look at this chromed beauty, it's perfect. Halo's pistol is widely considered to be one of the most overpowered handguns in gaming, and they aren't totally wrong. The pistol is borderline required throughout the campaign, but not actually because of its raw damage output. Instead, its most important feature is that, other than the sniper rifle that we'll be seeing a couple levels from now, the Magnum is the only gun capable of dealing precision damage to unshielded craniums. Keep that in mind, I'll be coming back to it. The next gun we get, just a few meters down the hall, is Halo's venerable assault rifle. Well, I say venerable, but I distinctly remember a friend group calling it the crowd pleaser because of its ludicrous 60-round magazine and enormous muzzle flare. Not because it's particularly effective, though it will mow through grunts with ease. Not that that's an impressive feat, but it can do it. Halo's assault rifle is fine in a pinch, but experienced players will quickly abandon it in favor of the other 2 weapons that make up what I think of as the core set. The first of which is the Type 25 directed energy rifle, or the plasma rifle colloquially. Plasma weapons in Halo are when we really start getting into the sandbox discussion, so I'm excited. The Covenant plasma rifle is more or less the plasma analog of the human assault rifle. Hold the trigger, get a rain of plasma bolts. It's significantly more accurate than the assault rifle, but the projectiles are much slower, so kind of a wash. Before I go any more detail than that, I want to bring up the also Type 25 directed energy pistol, or as reasonable individuals call it, the plasma pistol. The Covenant's plasma weapons, honed over millennia of constant warfare with advanced interstellar species, are highly effective against energy shields, such as your own, or elites, which haven't mentioned enemies yet. We'll get there, don't worry. While human ballistic weapons have magazines that you have to swap out to load new rounds, the Covenant plasma weapons have a battery that cannot be swapped in the field. Instead, you have to swap out the whole gun for a new one before the battery runs dry. And I mean before. At low battery, the gun will fail to fire pretty frequently, and that's best avoided, as you might be able to imagine. Luckily, liberated directed energy firearms are generously scattered all over the ground after every fight, so ammo is rarely a concern in practice. Covenant plasma weapons also have a heat mechanic, where sustained fire will eventually cause the gun to overheat, at which point it enters a venting mode and becomes non-operational until it cools all the way down. Oh, look at that! Another little system that you can push at a cost. Anyway, the plasma rifle, that's the sleek blue one, is fully automatic. Pull the trigger, start blasting. But the plasma pistol, it's the weird lumpy green one, is a little more nuanced. It's semi-auto, so you get 1 bolt per pull of the trigger, and they hit pretty hard actually. Harder than a single shot from the plasma rifle even. But if you hold the trigger, the gun builds up an angry mass of green plasma at the end that you can then release, immediately tripping the gun's overheat protection. This charged shot takes out the shields of anything it hits, and it has a little bit of homing to it. It becomes more of a consideration as the player progresses through the levels and more guns become available, but the player has to pick and choose what guns to take into any given fight. Because you see, back when I mentioned that first-person shooters of the era featured a player with guns bulging out of their pockets, a feature replicated in the modern throwback boomer shooters of today, I was going somewhere with that. See what I did there? That's called plant and payoff. I would have gone with sow and reap because playing Vintage Story changes how your brain works, but, you know, having 10 guns all in a row, such as how Timesplitters did it, leaves a lot to be desired in terms of quality of life. Timesplitters, Perfect Dark, and GoldenEye are actually kind of strange in comparison to the PC first-person shooters where the backpack of guns originated. See, in boomer shooters like Doom, Quake, and Unreal, not Tournament, some of the guns are basically upgrades, but most of them will be paired to specific enemies. This might take the form of straight-up damage modifiers, or it can be any of a wide range of mechanical incentives to use specific weapons for specific enemies. Early console FPS games like GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, and Timesplitters maintained this wide arsenal, but generally positioned weapons more as linear upgrades, with a few specialty weapons like a rocket launcher or a sniper rifle thrown in. These games will generally reset the player to just a pistol for the beginning of each level, so each mission has its own little mini progression. It feels good when done well. Real quick aside, modern Quake maps, since they typically don't exist in the context of a full episode, often lean on this single level progression, and it's surprising how well it works. If you like FPS games, you owe it to yourself to check out modern Quake. And Halo, back on topic. While a more or less linear weapon progression reduces how often the player has to interact with a clunky weapon selection system, it doesn't actually fix the problem of it still being pretty shite. And I say that as someone that played Timesplitters Future Perfect for a, frankly, preposterous number of hours, probably nearing 1,000. Shout out to the Xbox Live TSFP community, by the way. I still remember you guys. So Bungie decided to limit the player to being able to carry 2 weapons. The one in their hands and the one on their hip. To switch between them, you tap a single button. You may also exchange your current weapon with one on the ground. Yes, I swear to Algorithmos, God of Content Delivery, that this was a revolutionary idea at the time. This is where that started. But the real genius of the system is that, sure, you have fewer guns in your pockets and smaller number bad, right? Well, let me flip that around on you. I say this design greatly enhances player expression. Much like limitations inspire creativity, limited inventory space increases the importance of choosing which weapons you're going to take into the next fight. And sometimes you need to get a little creative with how you use the guns you've saddled yourself with. You chose to show up to this fight with an assault rifle and a plasma rifle with 30% battery left. How you gonna make this work, hotshot? Thankfully, if you find yourself in such an unenviable situation, your damage potential is not limited to just the guns you carry. Again, eschewing the conventions of the genre at the time, the player can throw a fist or a grenade at any time, without switching away from your gun. Again, this was fairly unique, not a given like it is today. We even had a fancy name for it that reviews became sure to mention going forward. Offhand actions. The first of these offhand actions that Halo introduces the player to is melee. Mechanically, the melee in Halo is pretty bare bones. At this point in the franchise, there wasn't a lunge or any kind of tracking for melee, so if you hit or not is entirely up to what at least feels like a raycast wherever the player is looking at the time of potential impact. It's honestly pretty unforgiving and can be weirdly difficult to land hits even with a mouse. Not that I'm an esports pro or anything, as I'm sure this gameplay clearly illustrates, but I'm not completely incompetent with a mouse. It's like, a little. Skill issues notwithstanding, melee is an important part of Halo's sandbox, and you'll often find yourself in close enough quarters to make use of it. and your enemies aren't shy about taking a swing at you either. When making a melee attack, you become unable to perform either of the other two combat actions, shooting or throwing a grenade, until the melee animation has completed. The length of the recovery actually varies by weapon, as they all have unique animations. That doesn't really end up mattering, like, ever, but it's the thing I wanted to include because it's kind of quirky and weird, in a way that gives something those intangible qualities like character, charm, or soul. Melee in Halo 1 honestly feels kinda weak regardless of difficulty, often taking multiple hits to kill a single unshielded enemy. It redeems itself by having an incredibly strong utility function as a reasonably reliable way to stagger an enemy in close range. Getting a kill with it is a nice bonus. Except when you're able to get behind an enemy and then your melee is a one-hit kill. In Halo parlance, that's called an assassination. Thus, melee isn't a cudgel so much as it is a tactical tool that the player can use to create an opening in combat. Perhaps you charge an enemy to stagger them as your opening move before they can react. Perhaps you just dumped your plasma pistol and an enemy came out from behind the tree next to you and you need to buy time to find new cover. Maybe your shield is down and you really need to break line of sight like right now. Just as you're starting to weave melee into your 30 seconds of fun, yeah, I'll get to it, Halo introduces the second offhand action. Grenades. Just like melee, throwing a grenade locks you into that action until the throwing animation has ended, though it's pretty short. The primary cost to throwing a grenade is the expenditure of resources. You can only carry 4 of each of the two types, and since you'll be looting them as you go, there's an evidently finite supply in each level. And they can chain off of each other, and that's always a lot of chaotic fun. The two types of grenades themselves are mostly interchangeable, at least in single player. The human fragmentation grenade operates pretty much exactly how you expect. It bounces around quite a bit, and the fuse once it strikes the surface is rather short. It also has a pretty large splash radius, making it a reliable way to get some damage on enemies and thin their numbers. Plasma grenades don't bounce nearly as much, have a much longer fuse, and can stick to enemies. This can be especially useful against vehicles if you can land the stick. I hate to say it, but sticking most enemies is too difficult to really rely on for reasons I'll get to soon, and when you do get a stick, the enemy's behavior can be unpredictable. They can even charge you. Now that's cool and I actually really like it. I think it fits well with the game's hugely dynamic sandbox, but I ultimately find that the plasma grenade's fairly dead bounce and long fuse time make it better suited to scattering enemies from an area more so than actually taking them out. The plasma grenade, while seemingly inferior as a purely destructive tool, is instead a tactical one. By having these offhand actions and heavily leaning into them in Halo's gameplay design, Bungie turned a limitation, the paucity of buttons available on a controller compared to a keyboard, into an asset. The triangle of firearms, frags, and fisticuffs, and their interplay expands the number of tactical options available to the player at any given moment. And it does this even while it streamlines the controls to cram a keyboard onto a couple face buttons. But methods of dealing damage do not exist in a void with nothing to deal damage to. So who are we shooting? In this first level, we'll only run into 2 enemy types, though there's plenty more to come. And the first one is the diminutive grunts, or Ungoi. Grunts have no shields and are easy enough to take out, especially if you're a decent shot with a pistol. However, even the humble plasma pistol will quickly chunk your shields down after just a few hits, and there sure are a lot of them. On the other end of the spectrum are the elites, or Sangheili. The Sangheili are a race of proud warriors and are in many ways your physical equal on the battlefield. They're equipped with the very energy shields yours are derived from, they're fierce and aggressive, they'll try to dodge everything you throw at them, and they, at least occasionally, seem to have some understanding of cover. Elites come decked out in fancy colored armor, with each armor color denoting a rank or specialty role. In this first level, you'll only really see blues and reds, but the handful of gold elites scattered through the campaign are always a threat, with their energy sword that can take the chief out in a single hit, and the shields and ferocity necessary to close the distance. Because that's the thing about Halo's AI. Separating enemies into tiers or just having different enemies in general in your game was not an innovation. It's how Halo's AI behaves that truly set them apart. The elites were quite intelligent, or at least seemed convincingly so for the time, and a few of them can easily outflank a player that leaves an opening for them to do so. To compound the threat elites pose, they also act as leaders for the other enemies in the area. In this level, grunts will cluster around elites, posing an amorphous threat as well as being literal meat shields. For each encounter, the player has to decide target priority. Do you sweep and clear the grunts first because they're easy to eliminate and getting all those guns off the field is an obvious boon? Or do you go after the elite first, causing the grunts in their group to scatter in fear? Oh yeah, that's an interaction between the AI. They are aware of each other dying and will react to it. Elites may taunt you when a fellow elite dies, while the last grunt in a group is probably going to run away whimpering. Mood, buddy. This is both a way to reward the player's tactical decisions and gives real character to the different alien races that make up the Covenant. The generic enemies of Halo are characters in their own right. They may not have names or dialogue, but they contribute to the atmosphere of Halo. When the player kills an elite and sees a nearby grunt turn and run while yelling, "They got elite!" that is storytelling. Sure, the player is a badass, but it also communicates the grunts' cowardly natures and their subservient role to the elites within the social and political structure of the Covenant. Wait, isn't this just some dumb game for kids about shooting aliens? Nope, it's art. That's my whole point. I got more evidence though, so we're moving on. Now that we have a decent perspective on what makes Halo's core gameplay loop tick, it's time to talk about the infamous 30 seconds of fun. This was from a behind-the-scenes video for Halo 2, but the design ethos was the same in Halo 1, so I'll just roll the clip that you've definitely heard before.
In Halo 1, there was maybe 30 seconds of fun that happened over and over and over and over again. So if you can get 30 seconds of fun, you can pretty much stretch that out to be an entire game. Encountering a bunch of guys, melee attacking one of them before they were aware, throwing a grenade into a group of other guys, and then cleaning up the stragglers before they could surround you. And so you can have all the great graphics and all the different characters and lots of different weapons with amazing effects, but if you don't nail that 30 seconds, you're not going to have a great game.
Honestly, since I've blathered on for... wow, I've written a lot already. I think it's pretty obvious I'm rather fond of this game, and I think they nailed those 30 seconds of fun. So, what do they actually feel like? Well, combat in this first level of Halo is built to be very close quarters, and it's all about managing space on the battlefield. What angles do you have cover from? What's your distance to the target? Who has a line of sight when you break cover? Is anyone going for a flank? Grenades can be used to change the shape of the battlefield and force your enemies to make a mistake. When you leave cover to capitalize, what is your route? Do you know where your next and nearest piece of cover is? Fallback plans, priority, and opportunity targets? You get surprised by an elite behind the cover you were hoping to use. Do you start shooting? Throw a punch for the stagger to buy some time? Every moment of combat keeps you in this dynamic tug of war over control of the battlefield, and it just feels great to interact with. You know how Destiny fans will say that there just aren't any games that feel quite as good as Destiny? It's true, by the way. It just feels amazing to get in there and press those buttons and click on some heads. It just does. That's the Bungie magic. Halo is missing a few refinements that we see in Bungie's later games, but you can feel the lineage. And if you're into the historical development of games as an artistic medium, that's really neat. And speaking of the history of games, first-person shooters around this time were sometimes derisively called corridor shooters, because the levels were generally tight corridors due to technical limitations, just like this first level of Halo. Which is why the next level is in a huge open environment, and the second half of it isn't even linear. Though this is the only time multiple objectives you can complete in any order feature within a level, so don't get too excited. But open spaces will be a recurring design element going forward, and I just want to make it clear that this was pretty visually impressive at the time. Halo released in 2001. That's after the PlayStation 2 was on the market, but the very limited draw distance of the PS1 was still pretty fresh in memory. Halo looked vast for its time, but I'll talk more on how Halo looks later. It quickly becomes apparent that these outdoor spaces play very differently. I find them to generally be a bit harder than the close quarters stuff. Melee is obviously going to have some target acquisition deficiencies, and grenades are also generally less effective, as longer throws give enemies more time to react and there's plenty of space for them to run to. And with all that space to run around in, it's also much easier to lose your cover to a pair of flanking elites or a swarm of grunts. Oh, and the new enemy, don't want to forget about them. The second level of Halo, called Halo, because you're on Halo, introduces the Kigyar, or Jackals. If you've never played Halo but you know about Jackals, it's probably because of Sniper Jackals. If you've never played Halo but you know about Jackals, it's probably because of Jackal snipers. But that was a Halo 2 invention. Over here in Halo 1, Jackals have wrist-mounted energy shields. Compared to the full-body shields that elites have, these are much stronger, but don't offer full coverage. Though it does offer really good visual feedback when you hit them, with the whole shield flashing and gradually turning red. The trick to Jackals is that you can just about land a hit on their hand poking around the edge of the shield, which will stagger them, and you have a brief moment to either line up a shot on their exposed fleshy bits or just get around them. You can also bash their shield out of the way if you're close enough. Jackals are a unique addition to the sandbox, taking up relatively static positions and denying map control to the player until they've been dealt with. So with all these new challenges, surely Bungie has gifted us with a blessing to see us through it all, right? Well, we got the Needler, which I loved as a kid. The Needler is a Covenant weapon that you can reload, and it fires bright pink homing projectiles that stick into enemies for a bit before they detonate. And if you get enough of them in a single enemy, they super combine into a huge column of pink fire. Oh, and the ammo is seemingly stored in retracting spines along the back of the weapon. I love the design of this thing, and I use it at every opportunity as a kid. But now, as an adult with the power of analyzing things through an objective lens, it's kind of butts. The projectiles are so incredibly slow that you are relying entirely on the homing to land any shots. Which would be fine, but the homing sucks. The Needler in Halo 1 is unfortunately kind of terrible. I do still love the giant column of pink hellfire, though. They really should have kept that in the later games where the Needler doesn't suck. On the topic of things that don't suck, it's in this level that we get our first taste of the vehicles of Halo in the form of the Puma. Sorry, the Warthog. The Warthog is the first of several vehicles that feature in the Halo campaign, and they all control in basically the same way. Simply point the camera in the direction you would like to go, and it will be so. It could not be more intuitive, and the Warthog is just plain fun to drive, sliding around like mad. After finding and hopefully saving a few groups of Marines, though that can be a challenge on higher difficulties, Foehammer 419 picks us up because we've found the location of Captain Keyes and he's being held prisoner. He gave us a pretty sweet pistol, so we're off to rescue him and the rest of the surviving command crew. And this is where I talk about the sniper rifle. Technically, the sniper rifle is introduced in the previous level, but come on. Truth and Reconciliation is Halo's set-piece sniper level. Truth and Reconciliation walked, so all Gillied Up could run. Oh yeah, this is what I love about games as an art form. They reference each other, they build off each other, and you can trace the lineage of the ideas and how they evolved from earlier concepts. It's so cool. Anyway, the sniper rifle itself is pretty standard fare, though the night vision is a fun touch that seemed novel at the time and lends itself well to the stealth framing of the level. Halo's stealth is extremely rudimentary, but it works well enough for this mission to function and it doesn't overstay its welcome. And this is actually just how the AI normally works. The only gimmick that's really happening here is that the sniper rifle isn't audible to enemies for some reason, so they aren't aware of you until they either see you or they're alerted by someone else seeing you. Outside of the occasional sleeping grunt or lucky assassination to start a fight, the stealth mechanics don't play an especially large role, but their inclusion is appreciated. Right at the end of this first section, we are introduced to the final member of the Covenant's forces, Meglekolo, or Hunters. Hunters are incredibly heavily armored living tanks with an arm-mounted cannon and a shield that doubles as a highly effective means of delivering blunt force trauma at high velocity. It kind of falls down once you realize that their back is coded as a head, so the pistol just kills them in one shot. I actually always really liked this. It took a while before I figured it out, and then it felt like I was impossibly badass the first time I did it to both hunters in a row. Oh, and hunters are actually bonded colonies of worms with Gestalt intelligence and power armor, and yes, I'm serious, I love this game. This is why, even in Halo 1, hunters are always found as a pair, and you can see them look at the body of their... This is why, even in Halo 1, hunters are always found as a pair, and you can see them look at the body of their fallen partner and mourn them for a moment. In later games, they're more prone to entering a rage. Seeing that interaction as a kid, that really made them seem more real. You don't often see emotion expressed in enemy AI, especially not with priority over combat actions. It made me begin to consider my enemy as a people with a culture rather than merely, bad guys to shoot. Yeah, enemies showing depth beyond pure mechanics was nothing new in gaming as a whole. That's kind of the whole selling point of narrative-driven RPGs after all. But in a first-person shooter? With some random enemy? On a console which were perceived as a bit of a toy? That was something new. And the lore about the hunters wasn't delivered through the dialogue, it wasn't put in your face. No, I got curious about the hunters and started looking in the instruction manual, online, in the novels, in gaming mags, and Bungie's very candid documentaries. Halo invites the player to ask questions about its world, and in many cases those answers can be found. For example, once we get into the second part of the level, we move to the cramped corridors of a Covenant cruiser, crippled in earlier combat. The glowing lights along the bottom of the walls? That's the fiber optic cabling that carries data through the whole ship. Also, while human vessels typically have windows, Covenant ships do not, and their bridge is buried deep within the hull where it's better protected. Anyway, these claustrophobic purple hallways and their dark corners are host to our introduction to stealth elites, and elites wielding energy swords, which show up in most levels going forward. These guys can kill you in a single hit, and they will charge you pretty relentlessly, so they become an immediate priority in any fight. We rescue Captain Keyes from the brig and escort him to... Oh, yeah, this is an escort mission. It's actually not that bad. It's a pretty short distance and Keyes mostly stays out of trouble. You've been surrounded by fellow humans for much of the game so far, so maybe it's about time I talk about them. They're talkative. Really talkative. Full of quips and one-liners and character. And it's not just sound files. They'll occasionally dump rounds into a body and maybe taunt it. My favorite is, "Get up so I can kill you again." And it's worth also mentioning the quality of the voice acting in Halo. At the time, it was common for vocal talent to be sourced directly from the development team themselves, and that tradition is still in full force in Halo to great effect. The grunts are voiced by Joe Staten, and the game is better for it. However, for scripted dialogue, Bungie did full auditions and hired voice actors and did multiple takes, and it shows. The quality of voice acting in Halo's scripted dialogue is all up there with the best of the business today. In fact, Halo's presentation in general still holds up. It's one of the games responsible for standardizing the in-engine cutscene, rather than plastering a heavily compressed FMV over the screen. Being very early days, the tools developers used to make these cutscenes were extremely crude. The camera can only move along arcing semicircular paths, and is always facing directly at a fixed point in space. When the Chief is walking in a cutscene, that's a recording of a developer actually walking in the game and manually triggering bespoke animations. And yet, the camera angles are well composed, the lighting is good, the pacing is strong. Halo introduced a cinematic feel that was unlike pretty much anything else at the time. Anyway, we rescue Captain Keyes, and he overheard the Covenant talking about looking for Halo's control room. It turns out, the Covenant believe Halo is a weapon of vast, unimaginable power. This will be completely retconned in the opening cutscene of Halo 2, and I've never heard anyone bring that up, so let's just move on. If Halo being a super weapon is at all possible, we need to beat them to the control room. And to do that, we need to know where it is. Cue how I learned the word cartographer. The Silent Cartographer is probably the best level in the entire game. It's fondly remembered because it's just so dang clever. being entirely self-contained on an island with multiple paths to the interior that connect to various Forerunner structures. I'll get to that in like 3 sentences, bear with me. The level starts with a storming of the beach. Hard to go wrong with that opening, really. And this level might just have the best views we get of the ring itself in the whole game. This enormous structure looms over us in the skybox through every level, and it's just such a cool alien sight. Halo makes it hard to forget that you're on an ancient alien ring world. The level sends us in and out of the narrow paths that make up the interior of the island, connecting several Forerunner structures. This isn't actually our first time seeing Forerunner structures, of course. We've been on a ring world built by them ever since the first level, not to mention the cave that isn't a natural formation. I skipped over it because it just didn't fit the narrative flow, you dig? We're talking about it now, so... Perhaps originally inspired by limited polygon budgets, the exterior architecture of Forerunner buildings clearly draws heavy inspiration from brutalism. However, here, the colossal massing of Forerunner buildings is used to inspire awe and wonder at the sheer monumental scale of it. But where brutalism is famed for featureless slabs of concrete or béton brut if you're lucky, Forerunner structures are actually alive with detail and subtle adornments when you get closer. These structures are part of a massive machine that you cannot hope to understand, but there's also artistry in them. And in the second half of this level, we get our first opportunity to really dive into the depths of the ring and its alien architecture. And it's got a vibe. I mean, the whole game does, but this was the first level where, as a kid, I noticed something about Halo. After the fighting stops, an eerie still falls over these cold metal halls. Halo, which has a great soundtrack, is quite content to play nothing at all. And for its time, Halo's environmental audio is amazing. It even holds up against some modern games. As the gunshots stop ringing, the only sounds that remain are your shuffling footsteps reverberating off the hard surfaces that surround you, and the sounds of the ring itself coming from every direction. The walls are lined with abstract iconography and symbolism, with lighting placed in a way that is clearly reverent. There is significance in these patterns that we do not understand. At some point, it will cross your mind while playing Halo that you are crawling around inside the machinery of a weapon so vast and so powerful that you cannot even begin to grasp how it might function. The artifacts left behind by the Forerunners are huge, imposing, and impossibly powerful. Technology that is sufficiently advanced becomes indistinguishable from magic. The Halo ring may as well have been created by dead gods. Hey, you could make a religion, but since I've made a point of turning the music off, I feel it's only right that I immediately highlight the quality of Halo's soundtrack. CD quality music was no longer a selling point by this time. We'd had an entire generation to be wowed by high-capacity optical storage mediums. Look, it was 2001. And in 2001, game music was a different beast. Licensed tracks were something of an oddity, and composers for games were typically whoever the devs knew that could program a banger into a tracker. Okay, way back in the day, games didn't used to be 100 gigs, they were more like 100 kilobytes, because storage was expensive. So games didn't contain music, they contained instructions for the audio hardware to make specific noises at specific times. I'm simplifying this a great deal because this is an aside, so go off in the comments if that annoys you. With the introduction of optical media with the PS1, developers were able to just put music on the disc like a CD and then stream that while the game was running. So that was old news. But most composers were from the demo scene, which I'm not getting into, and that's why PS1 music sounds the way it does. They were electronic music artists getting grandfathered in on whatever game concept the studio could land a publishing deal for. And it was great. But Halo sounded different. A few things were actual recorded instruments, perhaps most notably the chanting choir, but a lot of it is still synthesized instruments from 2001, and you can tell in a couple instances, but the music of Halo was captivating. There wasn't anything that sounded like it, and it immediately gives the tight corridors and dark cavernous spaces an almost spiritual significance. This ring is something bigger than humans or the Covenant. Once we get the location of Halo's control room and make our way back to the surface, it's time for us to see just how much bigger the ring really is. Also, Captain Keyes is going off on a mission and is out of content by the time we get back to the surface. I'm sure that'll be fine. Foehammer 419 comes and picks us up, and we prepare for an aerial insertion. From underground. I love this so much. This is dumb in like the best way. Games, please do more of this. It's great. Assault on the Control Room, or AOTCR, and yes, I'm going to be referencing this level enough that it needs an acronym, is a bit of a mixed bag. There's tons of variety on display: close quarters Forerunner hallways, wide open active battlefields, an extensive tank section, lots of ghosts if you feel like enjoying one of the other vehicles Halo has to offer. The Ghost is super fun, by the way, definitely recommend it. But it's a mixed bag because, well, this is the first time something starts to rear its ugly head. Halo was made under a really tight time constraint, and all 3 Halo games went over a massive overhaul roughly a year before release, for various reasons. And an artifact of this is the reuse of level geometry. AOTCR does this with repeated circular rooms. Each one is stuffed full of different cover arrangements, and there's a really good variety of enemy mixes, so it's not exact copies, but you really start to notice it after a while. And it's not like the devs didn't notice the issue. Why else would they have put arrows on the ground to show you where to go? I'm sure that'll be fine. Thankfully, these repeated rooms are interspersed between the unique exterior sections, and it's not too bad. It's just the start of something. I would like to give a shout out to the encounter with 2 parallel bridges, and there's a pair of hunters on the other side lobbing their cannon shots over at you like broadsides. That's creative encounter design, and I absolutely love it. But once we steal a Banshee so we can skip a good chunk of the level, we plug Cortana into the control room, and she tells us that the Covenant dug something up that was meant to stay buried, and we need to go save Captain Keyes from following them.
I don't understand.
There's no time. Get out of here, find Keyes, stop him. Before it's too late!
Foehammer 419 drops us off at the last known location of the Captain, a dark swamp hidden beneath a thick layer of fog. This is the level that makes graying Halo fans hate the anniversary graphics. They're just entirely too bright, and you can see too much. The original graphics are murky, indistinct. Silhouettes materialize out of the fog: a crashed pelican, a downed spirit, lumpy shapes on a ridge. You can hear a looping distress signal rain on your helmet, and eventually, a few shots from a human weapon, leading you to a Forerunner facility. Something is wrong. There are a few Covenant forces, but they seem ragged, huddled into small groups and surrounding themselves with hastily improvised barricades. Barricades that face the wrong direction. As you move deeper, alien blood covers the walls, defensive emplacements lay abandoned, and something is dripping from the ceiling. There's even a Marine that seems to be having a rough time of it.
Stay back! Stay back! You're not turning me into one of those things! I'll blow your brains out! Get away from me! Ah! Ah! Don't touch me, you freaks! I won't be like you, I'll die first! Find your own hiding place, the monsters are everywhere! Play dead! That's what I did. Play dead. They took the live ones. Oh God, I can still hear them. Monsters! Ah! 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 Just leave me alone! Sarge, Mendoza, Vicente. Oh God, the things took them. Away, 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 they went away. They're gone! Get it? Gone! They won't get me! Oh God! Oh God, I don't want to be like them, please. Please, no. Man, no.
And finally, you reach a doorway and...
Why do we always have to listen to this old stuff, Sarge?
Watch your mouth, son. This stuff is your history. It should remind you grunts what we're fighting to protect.
Hey, if the Covenant want to wipe out this particular part of my history, that's fine by me.
Yeah, better it than us. You ask them real nice next time you see them, Vicente. I'm sure they'll be happy to oblige.
Now Z looks clear. I'm bringing us down.
Go, go, go! Stay close, Jenkins! Mendoza, move it up! Wait here for the captain and his squad, then get your ass inside.
Sir!
Okay, let's move!
Which is weird, right? I mean, look at it. Something scrambled the insides.
What's that? Plasma scoring?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there was an accident, you know, friendly fire or something?
What do we have, Sergeant? Looks like a Covenant patrol. Badass elite units. All KIA.
Real pretty. Friend of yours?
Nah, we just met.
Right, well, let's get this door open.
I'll try, sir. But it looks like these Covenant worked pretty hard to lock it down.
Just do it, son.
Yes, sir. I got a bad feeling about this.
Boy, you always got a bad feeling about something.
Sarge, can you hear me?
What's going on, soldier?
He's got contact, lots of them, but they're not Covenant. They're just tearing through us. What the? Oh no!
Corporal, do you copy? Over. Mendoza, get your ass back up to second squad's position and find out what the hell is going on.
But-
I don't have time for your lip, soldier. I gave you an order.
Sarge! Listen!
What is that? Where's that coming from, Mendoza?
I don't... There! Mira!
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it! Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many,
Don't
Sarge!
even think about it, Marine.
Oh, this is loco!
Back here, Marine. That's an order.
Jenkins!
Welcome to the Flood. This is the ancient, primordial, eldritch horror that is the reason the Forerunners are extinct. And they're back. The Flood is a new faction of enemies, which means they get their own rollout of units. For now, there are only 2. The first Flood form we have to deal with is the Infection form, which some players affectionately call Popcorn, because they go pop when you shoot them. Infection forms instantly die to any form of damage, including contact with your shields and other infection forms getting popped. Your shields can only deal with a couple before going down, so it's not easy mode, and these little buggers are a nearly endless plague anytime the Flood is around, which, starting now, is basically all of the time. But the real threat from the Flood is the combat forms. Upon being infected, a suitable host is quickly transformed into a combat form, with tentacles growing throughout their body for locomotion. Combat forms also retain some of their prior knowledge, and many of them use the firearms that they did in life. They also have devastating melee attacks and can leap incredible distances. Yeah, they're space zombies. With the infection forms serving as a constant wave and combat forms punishing close quarters combat, cover becomes a much less pertinent consideration against the Flood. You must keep moving at all times. Thankfully, this level also sees the introduction of the perfect weapon for killing space zombies, a pump-action shotgun. The shotgun has a more interesting role to play in the multiplayer sandbox, but over here in single player, it's for killing Flood. It deals incredible amounts of damage to combat forms while seeming to barely tickle even grunts from equivalent ranges, which, once you zoom out a little, makes the shotgun an interesting choice for the player. It's the mechanical key that solves the lock that is the Flood, but you can only hold 2 weapons. Until this point, the most important factor determining your loadout was that you wanted a plasma weapon to strip shields, and the pistol to finish the job with precision damage. If you want the shotgun, you have to give one of those up. Which one are you choosing? Eventually, we managed to escape back to the surface and find a group of Marines that could really use our help. While trying to fight our way to an extraction, we're intercepted by a floating light bulb that tells us,
"Greetings. I am the monitor of Installation 04. I am 343 Guilty Spark.
And we have to help him in preventing the Flood from leaving the ring. And then we are teleported away to the most infamous level in Halo, the library. We now have the goal of retrieving the Index, a plot coupon that's required to be able to activate Halo and kill the Flood. This level introduces a couple new things, so let's go over them. First, we get to meet the Flood's third and final unit type, the Carrier form. These are poor infected souls that weren't big enough to be converted into a combat form, so they're instead turned into a bloated incubation sac on legs for new infection forms. Carriers don't have much in the way of health, and when they die, they fall over and explode with enough force to send other carrier forms ricocheting all over the place. They're honestly a really fun addition to the sandbox, as you can use their explosions to disrupt enemies, and the general chaos they introduce is just really fun. Less fun are the Rocket Flood. They're not actually a unique enemy type, but like sniper jackals, Rocket Flood will cast terror into the hearts of old gamers. They're just combat forms with rocket launchers, but for whatever reason, they have pinpoint accuracy, and you will get exploded by them out of nowhere a couple times during this level. We also get our first proper introduction to the Sentinels, which are general-purpose drones commanded by Guilty Spark, and in lore, they're tasked with doing the actual work of keeping Halo maintained and operational. Spark claims they're able to manage small flood infestations, though this one has already grown beyond their ability to control. Mechanically, the Sentinels are friendly AI, kinda like the Marines have been throughout the game. Also like the Marines, they're not all that useful. They'll get the occasional kill, and sometimes they'll be a real hero and stagger a rocket flood while you're trying to close that gap to get your shotgun in range, but mostly they draw aggro on occasion and live a little longer than Marines due to the whole flying thing. As a kid, I remember liking how they moved and wanted to get my hands on their gun. Thankfully, Halo 2 fulfilled that wish, but that's a different game entirely. But the library is not infamous for its Sentinels, or its carrier forms, or even the rocket flood. Well, that last one might be a contributing factor. No, the real reason it's infamous is because it's just so damn long. Or at least it feels like it is. I have no idea how long it takes the average player to make it through a given level, but the library feels like it's the longest, without a doubt. And that's a psychological thing. This may be my spiciest take in this whole video, but while I agree with all of the myriad complaints about the library, it's long, it's dark, it's monotonous as hell, the combat often feels overwhelming, I think that was all intentional. If games are art, and art makes us feel emotions, why can't those emotions be exhaustion, desperation, and horror? The reveal of the flood was a flashing neon sign that we are entering the horror zone, and the library exists to put the player into that mental state. So yeah, the library is probably the weakest level in terms of mechanical level design out of the entire franchise, but I posit that was never the point, and that it succeeds with flying colors at giving the player an experience that feels unpleasant and grueling. And as evidence, I'll just point to the cutscene right after we finally retrieve the index, that's the plot coupon, and teleport back to the control room, where Cortana is a little less than pleased with us for having been gallivanting around for 12 hours.
That wasn't supposed to happen.
Oh, really?
Cortana.
I've spent the last 12 hours cooped up in here watching you toady about, helping that thing get set to slit our throats.
Hold on now. He's a friend.
Oh, I didn't realize. He's your pal, is he? Your chum? Do you have any idea what that bastard almost made you do?
Yes. Activate Halo's defenses and destroy the flood, which is why we brought the index to the control center.
You mean this?
A construct in the core? That is absolutely unacceptable.
Sod off!
What impertinence! I shall purge you at once!
You sure that's a good idea?
How dare you? I'll...
Do what? I have the index. You can just float and sputter.
Enough! The flood is spreading. If we activate Halo's defenses, we can wipe them out.
You have no idea how this ring works, do you? Why the Forerunners built it? Halo doesn't kill Flood. It kills their food. Humans, Covenant, whatever. We're all equally edible. The only way to stop the Flood is to starve them to death. And that's exactly what Halo is designed to do. Wipe the galaxy clean of all sentient life. You don't believe me? Ask him.
Is it true?
More or less. Technically, this installation's pulse has a maximum effective radius of 25,000 light years. But once the others follow suit, this galaxy will be quite devoid of life. Or at least any life with sufficient biomass to sustain the flood. But you already knew that. I mean, How couldn't you?
Left out that little detail, did he?
We have followed outbreak containment procedure to the letter. You were with me each step of the way as we managed this crisis.
Chief, I'm picking up movement.
Why would you hesitate to do what you've already done?
We need to go. Right now.
Last time you asked me if it were my choice, would I do it? Having had considerable time to ponder your query, my answer has not changed. There is no choice. We must activate the ring.
Get us out of here.
If you are unwilling to help, I will simply find another. Still, I must have the index. Give your construct to me, or I will be forced to take her from you.
That's not going to happen.
So be it. Save his head. Dispose of the rest.
We are then immediately dropped into combat against the Sentinels. Thought they were friendlies? Well, guess what, bucko? Allegiances have shifted. Thankfully, we spawn holding a plasma pistol. I have no idea who in their right mind would be coming out of the library with a plasma pistol, but it's actually a pretty good fit for fighting Sentinels, who move very slowly, don't react to incoming projectiles, and get absolutely wrecked by damage from plasma weapons. We'll be seeing Sentinels appear as enemies for the rest of the game, though this is probably the most deadly they ever are, because you spawn rather far from cover and already taking fire. Kinda cheap of Bungie, really. Other than right here, you never face Sentinels alone, and they're especially easy to pick off when they're not aware of you. Because from this point on, we'll be seeing a lot of multi-faction combat, a core element of Halo's identity, one that 343 seems rather keen on pretending doesn't exist. Anyway, this level, 2 Betrayals, is the first level we're playing backwards. You may note I said first. It's well documented that Bungie dreamed a little too big for the time they had available before Microsoft needed Halo on shelves, and the back half is where the cuts happened. It's an economical choice, but this level is literally running AOTCR backwards for like significant portions. Credit where it's due, the introduction of Flood to these combat zones alongside the Covenant definitely changes the way combat encounters feel, and the unpredictable nature of the Flood means you're never quite sure what you're about to see around every corner. I'd really like to give a shout out to, again, the parallel bridge encounter in this level. Recalling the earlier encounter with the Hunters when going through the first time, Flood combat forms spawn on the distant bridge and leap across the gap while you're fighting Covenant. It's super chaotic, and it's just a really cool moment that feels iconic to me, so I wanted to mention it. Unfortunately, it's noticeable that we're running through the same level geometry, despite all the novel encounter designs being spread over the second helping. It also really doesn't help that this is the level with those awful circular rooms from before, and this time the helpful arrows on the floor, yeah, now they point the wrong way because, duh, of course they do. Oh, the plot thing happening is that Guilty Spark is going to try to fire the ring that kills all life in the galaxy to prevent the Flood from spreading, so we're blowing some stuff up to buy time. The long-term plan is for us to get to the Pillar of Autumn, the horse we rode in on, and trigger its self-destruct sequence. Starship's reactor should be enough to destabilize the ring itself, which would take out the Flood and prevent the ring's activation. However, we need another plot coupon, Captain Keyes' authorization, or his neural lace, to trigger the self-destruct sequence, and he's, back on the Truth and Reconciliation, because we're using a lot of that level too. So this is easily the worst bit of writing in the whole game, but this is operating on action movie logic, so I dare to ask, how are we gonna get there? Cortana learned that there's a teleportation grid all around the ring, but we could only use it just this once. But honestly, they kinda earn it because this is a cute interaction.
Oh, I see. The coordinate data needs to be... Right. Sorry.
So as stated before, this level is largely built from reused assets from the Truth and Reconciliation level. Which kinda sucks, but first we're sent on a detour through a huge hole in the floor. This level, all about the horror vibes again. It's dark, there's weird coolant oozing all over, the Flood feel endless. But even once you get back on board the ship, I always kind of liked this level. There's something special about seeing these sort of familiar halls now rotting and decayed, torn apart by a ravenous infection. And not only are we fighting Flood, but Covenant forces as well. They're trying to clear the Flood out so they don't use the ship to escape the ring. Though they generally seem enormously outmatched, and you'll often see groups fleeing combat forms throughout the halls once you get back on board. This is such a cool detail. The Flood is a threat to the player mechanically, but it's also a threat narratively. And it's details like this that really sell that narrative. The humanity of Halo's universe may have achieved spaceflight and a grand empire spanning hundreds of alien worlds, but they have been, for over 2 decades, on the losing side of an existential conflict with the Covenant. The game starts with the Pillar of Autumn on the run and being pursued by the Covenant. And now, you see your oppressor running in terror from a threat they are seemingly totally unable to control. That's powerful. That's environmental storytelling. Eat your heart out, Todd Howard. After fighting our way through a good chunk of a prior level again, we find Captain... Yeah, this cutscene? This is the one that really got wedged right into my brain as a kid.
No human life signs detected. The captain, he's one of them. We can't let the Flood get off this ring. You know what he'd expect. What he'd want us to do. It's done. I have the code. We should go.
With our gauntlets still moist with the gray matter of a once great man, we steal a Banshee and get on our way to the Pillar of Autumn to detonate its reactor. Because, yup, it's another repeated level. It's been long enough that this doesn't feel too bad, and returning to where you started is a long-standing narrative tradition. But I still gotta point out that the last 3 levels in Halo are all using previous levels in part or nearly wholesale. Thankfully, much of the meat of this level actually takes place in bespoke spaces, though there's a fair bit of generic hallways in there as well. We first fight through those hallways until we get to the bridge to start the self-destruct sequence, but Guilty Spark manages to shut it down from inside the engine room. So we gotta go down there and do it manually with grenades or rockets. While fighting our way through the twisted remains of the Pillar of Autumn, we'll be fighting Flood, a handful of Sentinels, and Spec Ops Covenant units. The latter isn't actually all that different from the usual guys, but the black looks cool, and the grunts carry fuel rod guns, which are functionally alien rocket launchers. This is funny because it's basically as big as they are, but it also makes these grunts a threat that's fun to work around without becoming the one-shot death machines that Rocket Flood can sometimes be. They also add a new element to the sandbox, as the fuel rod gun will explode a few seconds after the death of the user. And this explosion can cause nearby grenades to detonate as well. The chain reactions from this are pure chaos, and it was smart to save them for the tight quarters of this last level where cover is in ample supply. Speaking of rocket launchers, I haven't mentioned the human one at all. That's because I don't use it very much. They've been showing up in levels here and there ever since Silent Cartographer, but I just don't use them very often. Sometimes I'll be opportunistic and use one for a couple of shots, but I find they just don't have enough ammo to justify taking up one of my 2 weapon slots. They're too niche in a game that favors being able to tackle a variety of threats. They're fun, but they're a lot more fun in the multiplayer, where they're one of the power weapons that shapes map control dynamics. But I'm not talking about the multiplayer, so I'm bringing up the rocket launcher now because this is the one time I actually use it. The objective for this final mission of the game is to set the reactor to go critical by retracting these whatevers and chucking a grenade in there. I don't know why, but I'm astonishingly bad at that throw. I know, skill issue, go ahead and get that dunk on me in the comments, but there's another option. right next to the engine room is an armory. I don't think this is actually how a ship would be built in reality, but whatever. The armory, full of explosives, and a unique cloaked combat form in the back room, which is a fun jump scare if you're not expecting it. If you're inexplicably terrible at this grenade throw, the other option is to use a rocket launcher. And I kind of love this design. So if you go the grenade route, you have to be very sparing with your grenades during combat so you don't run out, sort of softly removing one of the combat actions available to you. If you instead opt to carry a rocket launcher through the fight, you're essentially giving up an entire weapon slot. I really like this as part of Halo's final challenge. Here it is, ostensibly the game's most difficult test of your mastery of its mechanics, and the final cherry on top is that you have to do it with an arm tied behind your back. But you do get to choose which arm, maintaining some player agency. And since it stems from the mission objective, it just feels natural. Completely invisible game design. Once we crack the shielding or whatever and the reactor is going critical, it's time for us to peace out in the most action movie way possible, driving a warthog through an obstacle course. It's dumb, but it's fun, and there's a tearjerker send-off for Foehammer 419 in the middle. Rest in peace. We eventually escape as the ring blows up behind us, and as we drift through space, Chief opines, "I think we're just getting started." And I don't think Bungie knew just how prophetic that was, because Halo went on to be the starting point of a piece of gaming history so big that for a time, old people would reference the Halos instead of the Marios or Nintendo as a generic stand-in for any video game, on a console that was not the bestseller of its generation. That was the PS2, which sold more than 5 times as many units. The Xbox barely sold more than the GameCube, and about 2.5 times more than the Dreamcast, just for the sake of comparison. And while that's more the story of Halo 2 and onward, that story was built on the rock-solid mechanical foundation and world building of this first game. And you could easily argue that the enduring popularity of first-person shooters on console is built on Halo's success, with it as the originator of regenerating health, the 2-weapon system, the motion tracker, and joystick controls that actually feel alright. But Halo is not a perfect game, no game ever is, and there's definitely some valid criticism to throw its way. The first one I have to bring up is the Flood. The reveal is excellent, the theming is very well done, and using the Flood as a third faction in combat always leads to a fun and chaotic time. I wish there was more of that throughout the game, even though we got quite a lot of it. However, I have a confession to make. I've played the first half of the game a lot more than I've played the back half, and a lot of that has to do with the Flood. I just don't find them all that fun to fight. Even setting the rocket Flood aside, the relentless aggression invalidates a lot of what makes the Covenant so fun to fight, managing space and angles, and replaces it with mostly just backpedaling and never slowing down. I find it a lot less interesting. But unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, this is compounded by the back third or so of the game being earlier missions run backwards. And one of those repeated missions already had a lot of repetition within itself to begin with, so it's really not doing itself any favors. And honestly, except for AOTCR in reverse, the other repeated levels aren't even that bad, with major changes in flow, decoration, and gameplay feel thanks to the introduction of non-Covenant forces into these familiar spaces. I would have preferred unique spaces, but there is still excellent gameplay to be had in the later stretches of the game. My bigger issue with Halo's level design actually comes down more to the repeated elements within mini-levels. Outside of the exterior areas, Assault on the Control Room is basically 2 different rooms with hallways connecting them ad nauseum. And 343 Guilty's Spark isn't that much better, though it really redeems itself by setting a hell of a mood. And then there's the library. I know this thing is about 3 different brushes copy-pasted all over and nothing else, but I think it's a masterclass in how to use level design to basically psychologically torture your player into mirroring the mental state of the protagonist, but yeah, that's gonna be a hard sell 99 times out of 10. Now for a take that might be a wee bit controversial, I think the audio for the human weapons is pretty dated. Today's baseline for speakers is so much better than it was 24 years ago, and the amount of bass on offer in Halo really falls flat today. A remastering of a couple key sound effects to take advantage of the increased dynamic range offered by no longer gaming on tiny CRTs would be a welcome update. Halo was a great game with the right controls at exactly the right time to have the impact it did on gaming forever. It pushed first-person shooters into the spotlight on console at a time when it was basically considered impossible for one to feel good on a controller. Halo is art because it is so intentionally designed by people firing on all cylinders to make something that they believed was a unique and incredible thing. It was made with ambition and dreams. They didn't hit every mark. There are absolutely legitimate criticisms to be made that I even agree with, but, Will, you just gotta play it. But, Will, you just gotta play it. Holy wow. This script is over 13,000 words. It is 133% the length of any other script I've done. So hopefully this video does a little better than that one though. Yes, we'll find out. Thank you to everyone that's made it to the end. I appreciate all of you. You have outlasted most of my voice. I actually have a ton more to say about Halo because I grew up with this thing and it means a lot to me personally. I have a lot of personal memories with it, and I know a bunch of little anecdotes about the development of the speedrun, behind the scenes details, that kind of thing. If you're interested in hearing some of those thoughts in an unscripted format, there's a narrated long play of sorts going up on my Patreon within the next couple days, which is linked down below. As for this channel, let me give you a rundown of what's up. I have a few longer term videos already in the works and making headway. I'd also like to start talking about games other than The Elder Scrolls, obviously. I'm thinking of making shorter videos for this channel, maybe focusing on specific mechanics or smaller games that I find neat for whatever reason. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be into. And speaking of my Patreon, supporting me on there supports both channels. I'm not abandoning either one. Oh, yeah, I have a second channel now, Tack Tangents, where I've been doing a vintage story series. The plan in the next episode is to finally get into the Iron Age, which is a great time to jump in. I'll link that down below and also on the end screen if YouTube lets me do that. Guess we'll find out. There's also a Discord linked down there, because of course there is, and a Blue Sky, because I just called Halo high art in excruciating detail for over an hour, and I'm making a vintage story Let's Play series. Where do you think I do my microblogging? But at the end of the day, thank you very much for stopping by and lending me your ear. And, as always, have a great one.